Finns have a certain reputation for toughness. They bathe in ice, occasionally chase off bears with brooms, and maintain one of the strongest conventional militaries in Europe. Those armed forces are now part of NATO, and that could be causing Russian military planners a major headache. Because right next to Finland's northern border is this, the Kola Peninsula. Home to Russia's ballistic missile submarines. It's central to Moscow's capacity to wage nuclear war. And it depends on one vital lifeline that's vulnerable to the Finns. So do the Russians suddenly have a Finland problem? And what might they do about it?
I'd say this is a major strategic setback for Russia.
It's pretty core to the survival instinct.
All right, so what is the Kola Peninsula and why does it matter? It lies in Russia's far northwest, mostly above the Arctic Circle in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Named after the Kola River that runs through it and often referred to as Kola, the peninsula is big. It's also one of the most heavily militarized regions in Russia. Looking at these satellite images, it doesn't take long to see why Kola matters to Russia. Bases, harbors, suspected nuclear storage depots, airfields with strategic bombers, and the facilities needed to keep them all running.
The Kola Peninsula is very important to Russia because it houses the Northern Fleet and nuclear ballistic missile submarine installations, so both ammunition storages, submarine repair facilities, and the submarine pens itself. And operating these submarines is key for the nuclear deterrent job.
Some of the subs stationed here are known as boomers. They have the capacity to wipe out entire cities. It's thought that each Borai-class submarine can carry up to 96 nuclear warheads, and each of those are several times as powerful as the Hiroshima bomb. And unlike land-based missiles in fixed silos, the subs can disappear into the Barents Sea.
So the idea is that once you have a submarine that goes into sea, then it is very difficult and pretty much impossible to find the submarine. So if someone attacks the land, the homeland of Russia or the United States or France or the United Kingdom, who also have submarines, then the idea is that submarines will survive and will be able to respond to retaliate.
So, Kola is something like a remote nuclear backup, a crucial element of Russia's nuclear arsenal, and a fortress likely stocked with fuel, weapons, and ammunition. Yet, for all its military might, Kola has a weakness. And this is where we get to the geography problem. This entire region depends on one main road and one railway line to connect it with the rest of Russia. They are crucial for supplies and soldiers.
Basically, these two transport facilities are the lifeline of the region. It's a very sparsely populated area, so you don't have many minor roads. It's a very swampy area, so even if you don't have roads, it's even hard to build one because of the lakes, the swamps, etc. A lot of water obstacles, frozen ground, so it's not an easy region to commute.
Let's take a look at this map. The R21 Highway connects St. Petersburg in the south to Murmansk way up in the north. Beside it runs the Murmansk Railway, one of the main arteries connecting the Kola Peninsula to the rest of Russia. North of Belomorsk, we could identify only one railway line heading towards Murmansk. It's a critical route for moving troops, equipment, and supplies. It is also vital for civilian life. A large share of the goods arriving in the Arctic city comes by rail, and thousands of people rely on the train as their main connection to the rest of Russia. Disrupt it, and Russia has a big problem. In fact, we know what happens when that connection is broken. In 2020, a railway bridge near Murmansk collapsed, forcing Russian railways to halt all traffic to the city. Wagons were stranded, trains stopped running, and the Murmansk trade port had to turn boats away because there was no cargo to load. And those bike-jumping, ice-bathing Finns with their strong army, they're just next door.
Obviously, the railroad specifically would be an interesting military target.
But Finland has been there for a long time. Let's look at what they could do and why Russia might see them as a problem now. Finland joined NATO in 2023 as a direct result of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine the previous year. Their military was a welcome addition. It's one of the strongest conventional militaries in Europe. But it's not just those already in uniform who are handy. All of Finland takes defense seriously. The country can mobilize around 280,000 soldiers in case of war. That number is expected to rise to 300,000 soon. Behind them stands a pool of nearly 1 million trained reservists. And behind that is a robust system of preparedness. Military depots across the country store stockpiles of ammunition, tanks, armored vehicles, and equipment ready to be issued to all those capable people in a crisis.
In the early post-Cold War years, Finland decided to stick to this relatively conservative model. And now, whereas other NATO allies are rebuilding like their systems, Finland is scaling up an existing system. And there is quite a big difference between those two efforts.
And that's also down to the country's often difficult history with Russia. Early in the Second World War, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. And although the Finns lost territory, they gave Joseph Stalin a bloody nose, inflicting heavy losses on a much larger opponent. What they call the Winter War became a defining moment in Finnish national identity. For many Finns, the lesson was clear. Be so strong that nobody thinks attacking you is ever a good idea. They didn't join NATO and tried to maintain a pragmatic relationship with Moscow. But Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine changed that calculation, pushing a once neutral country into the arms of NATO. Geopolitically, this was a big deal.
It's not only about Finland, but the Nordic region as a whole. And I'd say this is a major strategic setback for Russia, which was, of course, facilitated by NATO membership.
And Finland's new stance didn't stop with NATO membership itself. Since joining the alliance, Finland has become one of Ukraine's most committed supporters. Across Northern Europe, Finland, Sweden, and Norway, together with Denmark, are now planning defense as a team. They're weaving what were once separate national militaries into a regional security network.
Has Finland, by joining NATO, created a military dilemma for Russia? Yes, but I would say that it is a Nordic military dilemma. Defensive, of course, but something that Russia will have to take into account in its military planning.
Okay, so what is Russia's Finland problem? Until now, the only country in Europe's far north giving Russia cause for concern was Norway, a founding member of NATO. But now Sweden and Finland have joined too. That's made the situation much more difficult for Russia and given NATO military planners a lot more options. Intelligence agencies across Europe are warning that despite the situation in Ukraine, Russia may be ready to fight a large-scale conflict with NATO in the coming years. Germany says as early as 2029. That's only 3 years away. The Baltic states are generally seen as Moscow's next potential target. Imagine if the unthinkable happened and Russia actually attacked, let's say Estonia, starting a war with a NATO member. What would happen? Well, Finland's first reaction would most likely be a collective Top priority would likely be protecting the homeland, the capital Helsinki, and other vital parts of the country.
And then I will probably think, well, how do we support the effort in the Baltics the best way we can? And that is with the Finnish Navy closing the Baltic Sea to lock in the Russians in Kronstadt and St. Petersburg. Then, of course, to use the Air Force to support Estonia and other countries in the region that are probably under pressure by a sizable ground invasion. And then deep strike against logistical facilities.
Okay, so Finland could help in the Baltics. But if the goal would be to make Russia rethink the war altogether, where would you apply pressure?
Then I think in the second stage, the Kola Peninsula might be interesting for NATO.
And if NATO wanted to put pressure on the Kola Peninsula, Finland is right next to its very, very long driveway. But if you're Russia, you're probably not going to sit back and wait for trouble to arrive.
The scenario is that under certain circumstances, Russia may want to defend its what they call like military bastion in the Arctic region, in the Kola Peninsula and in the associated waters. And in this context, that could endanger Finnish territorial integrity if, let's say, the Russians would want to deploy air defense systems in Finland. And then the most offensive and serious scenario would be that Russia could entertain the idea of taking over the Norwegian coasts through Finland to give it a springboard for operations in Northern Atlantic, potentially disrupting sea traffic there.
All right, let's pause here for a moment. This is where we need to take a close look at the Kola Peninsula. It could be crucial for the Russians in a conflict with NATO, because Kola is about more than just nuclear weapons. It's from here that Russia's attack subs could venture into the North Atlantic through the so-called Greenland-Iceland-UK gap to intercept NATO resupply convoys heading to Europe. That was a tactic the Nazis used in World War II. And the submarines are only part of the picture. The Kola Peninsula is also home to some of Russia's most capable Arctic ground units.
NATO forces or Allied forces would try to isolate this threat and cut them off or diminish their threat to the northern flank. That would be done by striking directly at these military assets, the facilities that support them, but also, of course, cutting the logistics.
And this takes us back to that crucial highway and railroad link, the R21 Highway and the railroad heading up to Murmansk. It's the only way in and the only way out for troops, weapons, supplies, everything. Russia is experiencing what happens when a crucial logistics link like that is under attack right now in Ukraine. This is footage released by Ukrainian military units appearing to show medium-range drones striking supply routes. Ukrainian forces say they are disrupting a vital artery for Moscow's logistics, along the road connecting occupied Crimea to Russia via the so-called land bridge. The supply route to the Kola Peninsula is double that length and in much more inhospitable country, often going over rivers and marshland.
So we're talking about a lot of road and railroad and a lot of railroad bridges, and it's basically technically impossible to at the same time protect all of them.
This map shows just 5 locations where the railway seems to cross water or wetlands on bridges, causeways or embankments. Between Belomorsk and Murmansk, where there seems to be no alternative, we found about 50 such vulnerable spots. And that could be a problem for Russia, as it's often been called a railway army. They need trains to send troops where they need to be.
Disrupting those flows would most likely be NATO's target, or NATO's aim, and also Finland.
These are F-35 multi-role fighter jets. Finland bought 64 of them from the United States. The first F-35s are expected to arrive in Finland by the end of 2026.
So, of course, the joint strike munition that Finnish F-35s have, they could also be used especially against bridges, because these are heavy ammunition that sort of carry a much more punch than a usual drone.
On paper, the military logic seems straightforward. If Russia was fighting a war in the Baltics, exerting pressure up in the north could act as a crucial diversion. But wars aren't fought on paper, and just because a military option exists doesn't mean political leaders would choose it. Would Finland really go to war to help the Baltics?
Would a fellow ally carry out like offensive measures that would bind the forces of an attacker out of solidarity for your fellow ally? I think that certain kinship may extend to other Baltic states as well. And there would be probably emotional pleas for joining the fight. But then there's also then the survival instinct. So those might be in conflict.
And don't forget, the Kola Peninsula is home to some of Russia's most important nuclear infrastructure. And that raises another question. Could Kola be too dangerous to touch?
it is in NATO's interest that we at least entertain this possibility, because it has this deterrence value.
If Finland were to ever do something on Kola, it would have to be carefully calibrated.
Because it's not like Finland will be invading Kola Peninsula or something like that. So to the extent that the nuclear deterrence kind of there, it's very difficult to actually undermine in a serious way. So from that point of view, I don't think that that's a serious change in the nuclear deterrence kind of a policy or capability, if you will.
The storage depots for naval intercontinental ballistic missiles are very close to Norway, Finland, and all the logistical infrastructure, repair shops for nuclear reactors, etc. Of course, if a war happened, because attacking the nuclear triad is something that you don't do unless you are in full-fledged nuclear war, because it would trigger retaliation, makes targeting military facilities in this area always a very political issue.
So, where does all that leave us? The Kola Peninsula looks vulnerable. The crucial R21 Highway and the Murmansk Railway are exposed in many places and could become pressure points in a wider conflict. But whether NATO countries would actually try to exploit that vulnerability is another question entirely. What we can say with more certainty is that Russia is not ignoring its problem with Finland. In fact, Moscow has already begun reshaping its military posture in the high north. Research by Finnish broadcaster Yle and a network of Scandinavian media outlets has shown that Moscow is building up military infrastructure in the region. On Kola, one of Russia's key Arctic brigades has recently been upgraded into a new motor rifle division. Once the Ukraine war ends, the number of soldiers in this unit could effectively triple. Across the region, Russia is building and renovating bases, increasing equipment stockpiles, and even creating new units. One place stands out in particular, Petrozavodsk. The city has a major storage facility for military equipment. Over the past few years, it's been expanded, and recently equipment has been increasing again. This is the Soviet-era Rybka garrison. It's being reactivated and expanded. These images are from the outskirts of Petrozavodsk. Here we see another military base in construction, capable of housing thousands of soldiers. And this major military hub is right along both the R21 Highway and the Murmansk Railway. And Russia is also paying attention to those links.
The Russian military has a special branch of the engineering corps. These are railway engineers, special brigades that build and fix railway lines. They have specialized heavy-duty construction materials and railway bridge systems that they can use to first repair destroyed infrastructure, but second also to build new infrastructure even in the war zones.
One of these brigades has been stationed in Petrozavodsk. Russian authorities are already presenting it as the heir to the wartime railway troops that kept soldiers and supplies moving during the Winter War and the rest of World War II. Scandinavian media reports suggest that in total, Russia plans to station up to 115,000 troops along its borders with NATO. The Finnish military expects around 80,000 of them could be based near Finland. So what we've seen in this video is Russia is clearly behaving as though Finland matters and that it could be a problem. That's because the Finns are right next to one of Russia's most important military regions. And now that they've joined NATO, Moscow is having to rethink its posture there. Most experts agree that a conflict in the high north is unlikely in the near future. But a confrontation between Russia and NATO elsewhere would put the region into sharp focus. And the fact that Russia is rebuilding forces, reactivating military bases, and creating new units suggests the Kremlin is taking its Finland problem seriously.